Ever paid a bill late because you misplaced it? We'll spend all day organizing our closets, but when it comes to money, forget it. Stop the madness. Let's get it together financially. Organizing your money is easy when you have the tools to do it. Plus, you'll reduce frustration and give yourself the assurance that you're prepared for whatever life throws your way. Visit stcumoney.org to get 8 free tips on how to organize your money before you think about tackling those closets.
Spokane listens when business talks. Welcome to Business Talks, the region's only local business talk show with your host, Ryan McNeese. Business Talks is brought to you by our friends at STCU and Well Dressed Walrus. Now, let's get down to business with Business Talks.
Welcome to Business Talks. I'm Ryan McNeese, and we're here in the studio with Greg Niels, data, tech, and program expert. Let's chat about your background, how you got into this field in the first place. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, Ryan, thank you for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, I think as we talk to our listeners, most of our shows with Business Talks, we're interested in, by and large, something different. People that are taking a field that people, by and large, are aware of, but handle it, work within it in a different and unique way. And I think that's exactly what definitely interested me about your story, in that you're from Spokane, but ended up in New York City for a while. Let's start there. How did you get from Spokane to New York City in terms of education or employment?
Well, that's rather interesting. I met my wife when I was in Seattle studying microbiology, and I didn't know she was going to be my wife at the time. She decided to move to New York City, and I decided, well, she's worth following.
Like any good man would do, you followed her.
Yes.
Okay.
So I visited her, and I said, oh, New York is a terrible place coming from Spokane. It's rude and obnoxious and full of noise, and there's no beauty or glamour to it.
Yeah, it's a great city, but it's eye-opening.
Yes. So literally, I stayed with her for a couple of days and then ran back to Seattle. I came back out to visit her again, and I was like, you know, this city's growing on me. I rather like it.
Right.
And on the train ride to JFK to fly back, I said, how about I move in with you? And we literally walked across to the other side of the tracks and caught the train back.
Went back the other way.
And I called up my boss and said, I don't think I'm going to make it in to work on Monday.
I'm going to stay here long-term in Manhattan.
I said there's a potential of it.
And so how long, once you decided to stay in Manhattan, at least long-term, take us to how you got into the tech industry.
That was quite interesting. Immediately, Manhattan's an expensive place to stay. So immediately I needed to find a job. And coming from the Northwest and with great climbers, great climbing history here, I fell into teaching climbing in New York City. One of the people that I taught her daughter how to climb. She was really impressed with just the way that I handled myself under extreme tension.
Right.
You know, her daughter's 50 feet in the air, screaming she can't get down.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, what's your favorite thing to eat, you know? And she owned a company called Hyperspace Cowgirls. And contrary to the name, it's not a pornography site.
Right.
It's a site that she had developed for video games for girls. So we did Mary-Kate and Ashley. We did Crayola Paint and Play. And we market these saying, hey, this is going to be a big growing fashion or part of the world. Let's get video games specifically designed by a woman-led company for girls.
So really identifying the market and the market segment, that this could really be something. And I think a point that you're making that a lot of our guests on Business Talks end up talking about is it's a bit like The Alchemist. You would have had no idea that while you were working in this hiking program and climbing program that it would lead to this next step. And I think that's fascinating. And so once you got fairly heavily involved in that particular organization, how long did you work for them?
I worked for them for about a year and a half.
Okay, and then what came after that?
And so after a year and a half, I had a degree in molecular biology, microbiology, and I really wanted to merge technology with genetics. So I found a position that was available managing an Alzheimer's clinic at Columbia University.
Okay. And how long ultimately were you guys in Manhattan then?
We were there for almost 10 years.
Almost 10 years.
Not
so it just,
quite enough to be called a native.
That's pretty darn close, a
Yes.
decade. So working in your position at Columbia University, you were still in that position when you left Manhattan, right?
That's right.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what I think is so unique about your background, that you've taken these tech positions in data, tech, and programming, and no matter where you've been in the world, you've been able to do this work. And that is unique, because oftentimes folks pick occupations where they have to settle in a particular area and they drive to and fro work, and that's that. But you've been all over the world doing this work. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the interesting way that it came about is Michelle and I were going to have a baby, and I decided New York's not my atmosphere to raise a kid.
Right.
I went in and I told my boss, sorry, I love working here, but I can't anymore. And he understood that, and he said, well, give me a day, and let's see if you can just work from remote from anywhere. He came back and said, you got it. You can take your job, and since you're electronic and digital, you can just continue to work from Spokane.
And what year was that?
That was in 2007.
2007, because that's interesting in terms of the trajectory of technology. Yes, doable in 07, but that's a decade ago.
A decade ago, there was no Airbnb.
Right.
There was no iPhone.
See, it's a different world, and yet you were able to work remotely.
Yes, and at first it was there wasn't a well-proven path as far as how this gets achieved, and it wasn't a very popular business idea either. The idea that you kept your workers local, you could watch over them. It's sort of a brain trust by having everybody in a location.
Right. You got the culture, you got the ability to manage productivity, et cetera.
And you can walk over to somebody's desk and see what they're doing,
right,
versus replacing that with a phone call.
Right, what they're doing, what they're not doing.
So my boss, after presenting me with this idea of you can work for Spokane, I coughed it up and I said, I'm actually not going to Spokane right away. We're going to move to Barcelona instead.
Yeah, perfectly normal decision, right?
Yes. There was two reactions from the coworkers that I understood and that I liked. I heard a lot of, you suck.
Yeah, like, why do you get to do this?
You're a jerk. Why you?
Right.
And
why can't I do that is probably what they're thinking.
That was the next thing. And I guess I had the golden ticket for Willy Wonka's factory.
Right. I think so.
Because my boss did not offer this to anybody else.
Well, I think that's identifying you had a work history with them in terms of you are going to be productive from wherever you're at.
And that's one of the very important aspects of working remote is maintaining that open communication with whoever you're working with, so that not only are you getting the job done, but you're getting it done in a way that you like it.
Well, and that must come down to setting communication, number one, but setting benchmarks, the goals and benchmarks that your boss and or other staff members or yourself are trying to attain, and essentially checking the box that you've gotten that far.
Yes.
Towards that goal.
Yes, and that's we have a weekly check-in. Still, this is 10 years later that I've been doing this, and we check in on an as-needed basis, which turns out to be about once a week. And then other than that, it's, hey, how's your project going?
How would you say when you first were trying this on, so to speak, in Barcelona versus today, in terms of that interaction between the home office, if you will? Because it still is Columbia University, correct?
It's still Columbia University, and it's much more widely acceptable nowadays.
Sure.
You know, a lot of technology is being developed in China or India or in Mexico, and so the thought that your basis has to be location-based in technology is no longer there.
It's just not true.
And many people are like, hey, I can send this work in from anywhere, so
right.
Why don't I be more productive at home?
And if the project's getting done in many, many fields, you don't – that FaceTime is important, but not necessarily at particular stages in the project.
That's right. And FaceTime was pretty important. When we first got to Barcelona, there was no FaceTime.
Yeah, and I guess I said it generically of being in front of the person, but yes, FaceTime, the app. So
in Barcelona, we still had our check-ins, which was a little bit of a rude awakening, realizing that he either had to stay up late at night or I had to get up really early in the morning to just have a conversation. But also, Barcelona's technology was behind the United States. So the very first apartment that I landed in, the internet connection wasn't good enough for me to work from there.
In 2007.
In 2007. So I had to pick up and move my wife and my 4-month-old baby and say, we're going to move again to a different apartment with a better internet connection.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a whole other story in itself in terms of your dynamic with Michelle and a 4-year-old baby and making those moves in a foreign country.
Yeah, at first, it wasn't well received.
Right. I was maybe going to go that way, but
it was a little cumbersome. But we sweetened the pot because we found a beautiful spot overlooking Barcelona, and that quickly won her over, I believe.
Well, and I think most people listening would think similar to what some of your colleagues at Columbia were thinking. Wow, it's like a travel magazine article. It's like, I want that. I want to be a part of that. I want that to be part of my job description. How long were you able to work that as a part of your work model in Barcelona? How long were you there?
I was there for 4.5 months.
4.5 months. What led you to the next location?
So we had stayed in Barcelona, worked fantastic, and we had a couple of people visit us, and we thought, this is great. We miss our family. We miss our connections. Let's go to some place that's easier to travel to. So we moved from Barcelona over to Mexico, thinking, hey, more people to join the party.
That's right. Where in Mexico were you?
We were in the Yucatan Peninsula.
Okay.
Over by Merida and Playa del Carmen.
Right. What did you see as the differences between coming from Barcelona to the Yucatan Peninsula? Work-related. I actually got culture and work-related, but
Barcelona, both speak Spanish.
Yep.
It's slightly different dialects of it. Barcelona is a town that reminds me a lot of New York. It's got the energy, it's got the people, it's got the density.
Right.
Playa del Carmen is a beach and a couple of taco stands.
I've been through it briefly. Let's come right back. We're going to take a short break and come right back and talk about your travels and working remotely. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you.
You're listening to SpokaneTalksOnline.com, Spokane and North Idaho's business and community talk station.
Home. That word means so much more than its 4 letters suggest. R, that letter, stands alone. When you see someone wearing a blue block R, you're talking with a realtor. Your local neighborhood realtor can help you find your first home, your next home, or help you sell the one you have. Next time you think home, think Realtor. The brand makes the difference. This message brought to you by the members of the Spokane Association of Realtors. A special thank you to our friends at Tom Sawyer Country Coffee, the official coffee supplier here at Spokane Talks Online.
Here's Rob Curley, editor of the Spokesman Review.
Living life is complicated. They should give you an instruction manual, but they don't. So every day I feel like I have to try to put together an instruction manual for how you would live in Eastern Washington. Sometimes that's big national news, sometimes it's local news, but sometimes it's just telling you where to get a good hamburger and why the Zag Zone really works this year.
Online, in print, the Spokesman Review.
If you're like many shoppers, you love to find a deal online. Or you shop online because it's so convenient. And you probably know thieves love to go online too, to try to steal shoppers' credit card information. When you're shopping online, you can start protecting your credit card information by investigating the website you're shopping on. Make sure the online retailer lists a real phone number and a physical address. Read the site's privacy policy and search for reviews and ratings of the retailer. You can read more about safe shopping online at STCU's financial education blog. Go to stcumoney.org.
Welcome back to Business Talks. I'm Ryan McNeese, and we're here with Greg Niels, and we're talking about the concept of working remotely. And specifically in this case, we're talking about the data, tech, and programming world. And originally at the beginning of the show, we were talking about Greg being from Spokane, but making your way, following a great gal, following your wife, Michelle, to New York City, but then while working at Columbia University, basically creating, in your case, the job in 2007 of working remotely and doing your job for an entity, an organization out of Manhattan, but doing it from all over the world. And we chat about Barcelona, and then right before we left for the break, we were talking about the Yucatan Peninsula. And you spent how long total were you working remotely during this era?
I worked on the road for almost 2 years.
So almost 2 years. How many countries did that entail?
I have forgotten the tally, but roughly 15 to 18 different countries spanning the entire globe.
So let's touch on a couple of those, and maybe you can, for our listeners, kind of flesh out maybe some of the contrasting examples or some of the stories that stick out to you in terms of working remotely versus someone that's just working in any given town, USA. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but this is an interesting story that you were able to turn a bit of a life's passion into work-related and traveling all over the world. So I think you originally, we left off where you were in Mexico after Barcelona, then New Zealand. Is that where you ended up?
Yes, we left San Francisco on a round-the-world ticket, and the only rule was that you had to continuously fly one direction. You could fly north and south all you wanted, but you had to choose east and west.
Couldn't go back. Yeah.
That's right.
Interesting. And your child at this time was how old?
He's approximately 1 year old.
Oh, my gosh. I mean, it's kind of unheard of.
Traveling with a wife and a young child to New Zealand was completely foreign to most people, and it really actually opened a lot of doors as well.
Yeah, what are a couple of those? What would you say?
It was kind of wonderful. As my child aged, he became a toddler, and he would wander into situations that we would have never have gotten ourselves into.
And forced you to engage, maybe in a way that you wouldn't have.
Yes, and in different ways, too. New Zealand was an eye-opener because they didn't have a lot of internet, and so it was a difficult experience, and we really settled on not roaming as a backpacker would, but establishing ourselves in a country for about a month and diving into that country and getting to understand it.
Understand the culture of actually integrating yourself.
And that really helped with the business philosophy of enabling me to work and manage my time with work and then also my time to see the country.
Right, combine the two.
And meet all the people.
And a millennial that's listening probably would think, well, grab the backpack and go. You got your iPhone. But I think, as you said at the early parts of the show, this is 2007, this is 2008. That's not the norm.
That it is difficult, and many things just aren't set up for you. Even if you're going to an internet cafe, you still have to find them. Like when we left Australia and arrived in Hong Kong, all of a sudden there was no blazing English word for internet cafe.
Wow. You literally had to figure out, where am I going?
Where am I going? And these are all in Chinese characters now. What's your Wi-Fi code is a lot harder to punch in Chinese.
What's your password? So if I'm hearing you correctly, Barcelona, Yucatan Peninsula, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, you just mentioned. What are some interesting maybe perception of doing work in Hong Kong?
Hong Kong was really interesting. I expected them to be a hubbub of technology and leading the forefront. And I'm certain they were, but those doors weren't as open to me. They
That's
have
interesting.
A very divided society of well-off and not so well-off. And
a lot of disparity.
Yes, they have a lot of Filipinos that come over there to nanny and take care of that. And we were staying in a business hotel, so we were with other business travelers.
And how long were you in that hotel? It's not long-term.
Yeah, we were there for almost 3 weeks.
Almost 3 weeks. Well, that makes sense. And then from Hong Kong to Thailand. Tell me about Thailand.
Thailand was awesome.
Yeah.
It was every dream that could possibly come true. I'd take my laptop to the beach, and my wife and my kid would be playing on the pool. We'd be having the wait staff come over and give us amazing pad thai and Thai pizza. We traveled during the off seasons. We were the only people there during that time at a 5-star hotel. And they got to know us being there for almost a month, that we got invited to their employee party.
But there's where you're ingratiating yourself into the culture, into the community. You're not just there as a business traveler, but rather experiencing what they'd be experiencing on a daily basis.
That's the neat thing about seeing people, instead of just traveling with your backpack and hitting a day or two at some place, but getting past those tourist spots.
Right. No, I understand what you're talking about. I did that in Western Europe in the 90s, and that is a different experience where you actually land for a while, so to speak.
And you're welcomed by the community. And I ended up giving a speech at their holiday party, and then we all sang the song "Born in the USA."
Oh, there you go, Bruce Springsteen. In any language that works, right?
It does.
And you'd indicated that in Thailand, world-class scuba diving.
Oh, phenomenal.
And had you scuba dived before that, or is it something you got into there?
That's a great perk of not having coworkers. There's no business lunches anymore.
Yeah, good point.
I learned how to scuba dive in Mexico during my lunch hours.
Okay.
And scuba diving off of Thailand was a phenomenal way to unwind after a hectic day.
Yeah, hectic day in Thailand on the beach, so to speak. So what led you, I mean, and proximity obviously, but Thailand, Cambodia, I believe, was next on the list. How did that shake down?
Cambodia was an amazing experience. Angelina had just put it onto the scene. Angelina Jolie had put it on the scenes.
Yeah.
And she was in the process of adopting people, and we went to see Angkor Wat, and I was still working. But our tour guide took us into the forest besides Angkor Wat, where there is a huge amount of people living in grass huts, and there's no running water or toiletries. And when asked what we could do for them, he said pens and paper. That's all the kids wanted.
Pens and paper.
These kids would come running a mile through the forest to stand in a small line to get a little packet of paper and one pen.
So not having to set the bar too high, but rather the essentials.
And they were beaming. And that was one of the greatest pleasures of taking a business and personal trip, is seeing the other countries and what they afford their children.
Well, and I think you'd indicated in prior conversation, too, just seeing the circumstances that these kids are under. You'd mentioned blind and maimed orphans that you'd run into. Tell us a little bit about that.
One of the off things that we didn't see of the Vietnam War was all of the landmines that were left behind. And here were families. They needed to go into the wood to search for firewood to cook their meals. And as wood became more scarce, the children went further afield and would sometimes, unfortunately, step on a landmine. And they would lose their sight, oftentimes their hearing, and sometimes a limb as well.
Gosh.
And absolutely tragic to see.
Yeah.
And these were the effects of a war that had ended 30 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. And yet some of these bombs, if you will, are still around in the countryside.
And very much active still.
Gosh.
And still
it's
hurting
scary.
people. And as one of the business rewards is that you know that you're contributing financially to that country to kind of help them put these
Work through
Band-Aids
this.
on this
Yeah.
and clean up their areas.
Well, the things you've seen, I mean, that's why originally when we spoke, I was really excited to have you on the show, because it's unorthodox, it's interesting, and yet it can be done. Others can do it, specifically now. This was 2007, 2008. But India, Nepal, Egypt, Ireland, you just kept going for that 2-year period. Both you and Michelle, it was something that was working for you both. You were engaging in these countries in a way that was really working for you, not only personally, but professionally. Egypt, tell us a little bit about Egypt.
Egypt was an amazing country. It was right the beginning seeds of that Arab Spring were underway. And so there was a lot of unrest in the country. But yet here we were in a 5-star hotel,
right.
Working with a great internet connection, heading down to their pool in the afternoon, where my wife would be dressed in a moderate bathing suit, but women would be dressed in their burqas with their
right.
kids. And they were actually relaxing there. which was definitely a foreign concept.
So what did you think of the pyramids?
Love the pyramids, the tomb.
I've always wanted to see that.
One of the great King Tut's tomb is just an office.
Oh, really? Yeah.
There's nothing at the end of the hall.
Isn't that interesting? I don't know if you see that on National Geographic shows.
Huge line.
yeah, exactly. Nepal. You'd gone to Nepal, flying to Mount Everest. Tell us about that experience.
That was amazing. We left India because of the hustle and bustle of the difference in the variety of life, and we relaxed in Nepal. We flew over Mount Everest, and on our way driving back, we saw this monstrous line of cars 2 miles long. We said, "What's that for?" And the guy said, "Oh, that's the line for gas." It was 2 days long. People would camp out so that they'd preserve their space.
Well, isn't that a great example of the things we take for granted here?
Yes, and after getting done wasting gas on a trip to Everest and back, it's hard not to realize the perspective on that.
Well, clearly perspective is one thing you guys both gathered on this particular expedition for 2 years, many countries. Fast forward back to Spokane, Washington. You made a decision to come back to Spokane. I'd imagine that had a lot to do with raising a family. You were from here. And technology had changed greatly during that time period that we're talking about. 2007 to 2000, when you came back to Spokane, was 2009, 10. What's it like now, working remotely? You're still working on projects out of New York City, but from Spokane, Washington.
I love working remote. It is such a wonderful thing. Spokane is a wonderful community. There's great people here, very intelligent and successful people. And the way of life is so easy for raising kids that it's a great balance. I talk to my coworkers back in New York, and they have stresses that I don't even have to.
Well, I think
understand.
that's a point that I'm really interested in, is that you're able to work within the economic marketplace of Manhattan, one of the business centers of the world, but live in Spokane, Washington, as you indicated, live a quality of life with your family, standard of living with your family, but because of tech and your job and what you've created, handle projects out of New York City. I think that's extremely impressive, and we're out of time for today, but what I'd love to have you come back and chat about is some of the specific things you're doing with tech here in Spokane, some of the startup programs that you've been a part of, competitions you've been involved in, really promoting the tech industry. So I appreciate you being here today. We'll see you again soon.
And thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Craig.
Business Talks is produced in Spokane, Washington by SpokaneTalksOnline.com, which is solely responsible for its content. Ask a question, recommend a guest, and hear this program again online anytime at SpokaneTalksOnline.com. Business Talks is brought to you by our friends at STCU and Well Dressed Walrus. Business Talks wishes you good business and a good day.
If you're like many shoppers, you love to find a deal online. Or you shop online because it's so convenient. And you probably know thieves love to go online too, to try to steal shoppers' credit card information. When you're shopping online, you can start protecting your credit card information by investigating the website you're shopping on. Make sure the online retailer lists a real phone number and a physical address. Read the site's privacy policy and search for reviews and ratings of the retailer. You can read more about safe shopping online at STCU's financial education blog. Go to stcumoney.org.